Welcome to the training on strength-based assessment. There are several handouts that are attached in the media section of this training, and there is a copy of the PowerPoint slides that, if you wish, you can download and print for yourselves. After you've completed this video and are familiar with the attached material, you will be required to complete the quiz that is attached to this lesson with a passing score of 70% in order to complete this lesson. This lesson starts with the various regulations that define what must be included in an assessment and the timelines for the assessment. The training then moves on to a discussion of what makes an assessment a strength-based assessment. I hope that you find this lesson useful and meaningful. Each recipient of case management services must receive a thorough assessment which will serve as the basis for the development of the individual service plan. The assessment is a holistic review of the recipient's emotional, social, behavioral, and developmental functioning within the home, school, work, and community. The assessment must be updated annually. The case manager is required to be the individual to conduct the assessment. The case management assessment must be completed within the first 30 days that the recipient receives case management services and prior to the development of the treatment plan. The case manager must make at least one home visit prior to the completion of the assessment in order to evaluate the safety and well-being of the recipient. The home visit should be conducted in the setting in which the recipient resides. If the case manager is unable to make a home visit, the case manager must conduct a face-to-face interview in another setting. Written justification must be provided in the recipient's record explaining why the home visit could not be made. The case manager and the case manager supervisor must sign the written justification. The assessment in the clinical record must be an identifiable document. Supporting documentation, such as evaluations and discharge summaries from other treatment providers that are gathered to complete the assessment, must be included in the recipient's record. The assessment must include documentation that the case manager made the home visit prior to the completion of the assessment or has written documentation as to why this requirement could not be met. And finally, the assessment must be reviewed, signed, and dated by the case manager supervisor prior to the completion of the service plan. The Case Management Medicaid Handbook also indicates sources of information that are required to be included in the assessment. The assessment must include information from the following sources. First, the recipient. Second, the agency or individual who referred the person for case management services. Third, the recipient's family and friends, of course, with appropriate consent to release information from the person receiving services. Fourth, other agencies that are currently providing services to the recipient. Fifth, the school district for individuals who are under the age of 18 or if the individual is still attending school. And finally, number 6, previous treatment providers, including inpatient and outpatient treatment. The Medicaid Handbook also indicates the various components that must be included in the assessment. The assessment must include a statement of the presenting problems and current history, including the recipient's legal representatives or the family's assessment of the individual's situation. Psychiatric and medical history, including medications and any possible side effects. The recipient's current and potential strengths. Resources that are available to the recipient through his or her natural support system. The recipient's school placement, including adjustment and progress, if applicable. The recipient's relationships with his family and significant others. An identification and evaluation of the effectiveness of services that are currently being provided. And finally, an assessment of the individual's needs and functioning abilities in a variety of areas. The following slide will include a listing of the areas where there needs to be an assessment of needs and functioning. Finally, the Medicaid Handbook indicates what areas need to be assessed regarding the individual's needs and functioning abilities. First is the maintenance of the individual's mental health. Second, the individual's ability to remain abstinent from substance use. Next is family support and education. Also, education, vocational, or job training. Housing, food, clothing, and transportation are included. Medical and dental services, and legal assistance. The assessment must also include the development of community supports through support groups, peer groups, activities, community services, friends, employers, and finally, the assessment should include the ability for the individual to establish financial resources. The 65E15 regulations also include requirements for the case management assessment. The regulations define the assessment as a holistic review of a client's living situation, which includes a determination of the client's strengths and weaknesses, the client's needs and resources, and the strengths and weaknesses of the client's support system. The case managers are responsible for the overall completion of the assessment, but should work with the client and consult with relevant professionals where specific expertise is needed. The regulations go on to list all of the requirements that must be included in the assessment, but those requirements are reflected in what I previously discussed was in the Medicaid Handbook. I'll refer you specifically to the 65E15 regulations for a review of the information that is required to be included in the assessment. The Commission on Accreditation of Rehabilitation Facilities, now known as CARF International, has a set of standards for the assessment process. Specifically, the assessment process should focus on the person's specific needs, not on the program needs, or not on what the individual or the case manager believes the person's needs are, but what the person served believes that their needs are. Secondly, the assessment process should identify the goals and expectations of the person served. Again, the goals are defined in person-centered planning by the person who is served. Third, the assessment process is responsive to the changing needs of the person served. Over time, the assessment process and the individual or person-centered plan should change as the needs of the person change. Some needs will be met, some needs will remain unmet, and the person may experience new needs. And finally, fourth, the assessment process should reflect significant life changes of the person served. When there are specific or significant life events that occur for the person, it will change their needs, their goals, their expectations. And so the assessment process should reflect any time there is a significant life change. The CARF standards are also very specific about what should be included in a person-centered assessment. Rather than reading all of these to you, I'll just give you a couple of minutes to read through this list of items that should be included in an assessment. So far we've discussed the regulations for completing an assessment for case management, but we really haven't talked about what it means to do a strength-based assessment. Steve Morgan of Open Mind wrote an excellent article about strength-based assessment, and I'd like to share part of that article with you. And as the title says, please forgive the sermon because he's fairly passionate. Steve wrote, "The promotion of a strengths approach in mental health practice instantly presents a dilemma. Everyone agrees its place in good practice, but few people are really doing it. Service users will readily admit to wanting their strengths identified, acknowledged, and worked with, but they rarely experience this approach from mental health services. Many practitioners from different professional backgrounds will claim to be working with service user strengths. In reality, they often are paying some consideration to identifying and using strengths, but in my experience, it is extremely rare to find practitioners who can claim seriously to be working to an underlying set of values, principles, and philosophy of strengths-based practice. The main purpose of mental health services seems to be the need to identify problems through assessment and offer solutions through interventions. We have a rich lexicon to help us communicate our roles, expertise, and intentions. Illness, distress, disability, poor functioning, relapse, deficits, weaknesses, failings, psychotic, manic, depressed, anxious, personality disordered, abuse, exploitation, harassment. It would not be too difficult to draw up a complete alphabet of negativity. People present with problems. They are referred on with problems. We assess for problems. We identify problems. We attempt to resolve problems. We look for residual problems or the relapse of problems. We consider ourselves, whatever our professional background, to be problem solvers. The worst aspect of this scenario is when we refer to service users as being a problem if they do not readily engage with our prescribed solutions. Nowhere in this scenario do we gain a holistic picture of the individual, despite the rhetorical claims of many practitioners to be seeking this. Do many practitioners really pay anything more than lip service to the individual service user's strengths, abilities, achievements, resources, and personal wishes and aspirations? Many practitioners from all backgrounds will say that they work with a strengths perspective, but closer scrutiny of their practice generally fails to provide sufficient evidence for these claims. There may be occasional recognition of positives, but little active working with these attributes to help resolve some of the service user's needs and wants. Wouldn't a primary focus on strengths just be a distraction from the real business of mental health service delivery? If we paint a brightly colored picture of an individual, might we be left with the question, what do they need us for? Actually, this is a question we should ask of ourselves more often. Some service users may also fear that if they are seen to possess a range of strengths, abilities, and resources, they may not be able to access a needed service, or may have a service withdrawn. This is missing the point of what good quality holistic assessment should be achieving. A strengths approach offers a genuine basis for tackling so much of what mental health services struggle to deliver on a daily basis. Specifically, engagement of trusting working relationships, empowering people to take a lead in their own package of care, working collaboratively on a mutually agreed agenda for change, tapping into personal sources of motivation, and sustaining gains through learning and growing through change. A strengths approach is a specific method of working with and resolving the problems experienced by a person presenting to mental health services. It is not a separate function setting out to ignore the problems and difficulties. It attempts to identify a positive basis of individual resources from which to tackle the negatives that inevitably accompany the presenting of problems. It provides materials with which to tackle the blank canvas that often accompanies the detailed outline of problems. A fundamental change to practice needs to be based on a set of guiding principles. But what place is there for values and principles beyond the realms of academic thinking and theoretical debate? Guiding principles are not just about theory that busy practitioners will not find the time to read and think about. They are about the real attitudes and values that people hold, that shape and influence their practice at a very deep level. A true strengths approach is one that governs the way we think about people and the way we go about our work on a daily basis. It is not an option to apply only to certain people or to particular parts of our practice. It is the basis for all actions and interactions. Positively crafted principles should work at the practice level, helping practitioners to make sense of why they are in the job and what the details of their daily work are about. I suggest the following strength-based principles. First, the focus of the helping process is upon the service user's strengths, interests, abilities, and capabilities, not upon their deficits, weaknesses, or problems. Second, all service users have the capacity to learn, grow, and change. Third, the service user-practitioner relationship becomes a primary and essential partnership. Fourth, the service user is viewed as the director of the helping process. Fifth, continuity and acceptance are essential foundations for promoting recovery. Sixth, the helping process takes on an outreach perspective. And finally, the local neighborhood is viewed as a source of potential resources rather than as an obstacle. Natural neighborhood resources should be considered before segregated mental health services. There are several key factors in a person-centered assessment. First, people feel welcomed and heard. People seeking supports and services feel welcomed, listened to, and supported in their decisions, and are not prejudged. People are the experts when it comes to their own lives. They know their strengths, preferences, and needs. They expect their opinions to be heard, respected, and acted upon. A person-centered organization meets people where they are, reaching out to demonstrate that it sees them, hears them, and respects them. The organization acknowledges that individuals know their own strengths and vulnerability, as well as their goals, hopes, and expectations better than anyone else. The organization works with individuals to elicit these strengths and capacities throughout the assessment process and beyond. From the moment of first contact, a person-centered organization provides a way to engage and welcome consumers continuously and respectfully, promoting the values of choice, self-determination, and empowerment. Second, people have authority to plan and pursue their own vision. The person is in the best position to know what he or she wants and needs. In addition, the person has the control and influence in the decision processes that can begin to move visions into reality. People have the authority to state what they want. Other stakeholders, organizations, families, volunteers, community representatives, friends, or peers, listen to and respect each person's point of view. In a person-centered environment, an individual's involvement as a partner in care and supports extends beyond being heard to being in control of the decision-making processes that lead towards self-discovery and ultimately to recovery. By definition, the path toward recovery for an individual with a mental illness or substance use disorder is self-directed. The individual defines his or her life goals and determines the route toward those goals. In a person-centered environment, each person receives unconditional acceptance as he or she is, unique and special, with a singular life history and outlook, body of experiences, feelings, and emotions. The organization's values, structure, education, orientation, and personnel reflect the focus on the individual and on that person's dignity and right to self-direction. Formal and informal communications and interactions are respectful, compassionate, and avoid judgments, predictions, put-downs, labels, blaming, or shaming. Each individual is recognized by the organization and its staff as the foremost expert on him or herself. Other stakeholders in an individual's journey toward recovery, including family and peers, as well as those within the organization and its network of consumer supports, share information and interact with respect and also with the knowledge that the consumer is the final decision maker in a person-centered environment. Third, assessment of needs is fair and accurate. A person-centered system of supports and services includes a fair, valid, and reliable assessment measure. The assessment system provides sufficient information to identify needed supports. This assessment process is separate from person-centered planning. In a person-centered environment, the process of assessment is not simply a matter of establishing a behavioral diagnosis. An organization providing a person-centered system of care for people with mental illness and substance use disorders begins by identifying and building on an individual's assets, strengths, and areas of health and competence that together support an individual's sense of mastery over his or her condition while working toward a meaningful sense of community, belonging, and a self-defined quality of life. Person-centered assessment obtains holistic information about the individual and environment, including evaluation of both physical and behavioral health that can disclose any co-occurring disorders, whether behavioral problems such as substance use or physical ailments. It uses measures that carefully and accurately evaluate an individual from the perspectives of treatment, service, and support needs, coupled with strengths and capacities. Assessment also hears the individual's voice in identifying strengths and challenges, service preferences, and identified needs. The conduct of an initial evaluation of an individual seeking care and supports within a person-centered organization is the first opportunity an organization has to build the respectful collaborative partnership that is the hallmark of a person-centered philosophy. The content of the assessment is sufficiently deep and insightful and aware of the consumer's expressed wants and needs that it sets the groundwork for the ready development of an individualized, person-centered plan and budget for services and supports that are consistent with the individual's age, gender, race, ethnicity, and other personal characteristics. The assessment also discloses both provider and consumer assumptions about recovery and its sustainability. Importantly, assessment results are not static. They change over time, as do care and support needs, emphasizing the value of ongoing connectedness with the consumer to collaboratively assess progress and changing needs. And finally, fourth, assessment and discovery identify personally defined quality of life. Organizations that provide person-centered supports use valid and reliable methods to explore and discover each person's priority. This discovery enables the person to provide his or her own meaning and definitions to the goals and priorities that are most important to him or her. This discovery of personally defined quality of life is different than the standardized assessment described previously. In a person-centered organization, the values of an individual and that person's own roadmap toward recovery are the foundation on which services and supports are built. When an individual is able to choose his or her own path to recovery and the tools he or she needs to get there, it allows for a more self-determined life. It grants an individual a greater sense of both control and responsibility. Person-centered organizations work with individuals with mental illness and substance use disorders to engage in a dialogue about the consumer's personal meaning of recovery and how it can be achieved in practical and specific terms. Working with the organization's staff, the consumer defines his or her own life goals. Together, they design a unique path toward those goals, working with the values of both the person-centered organization and those of the consumer. In doing so, organizations may discover that while organizational goals and values emphasize freedom from symptoms, the individual may define recovery as a home of one's own, a job, a circle of friends, and a sense of self-value. A strengths-based approach offers a genuine basis for addressing the primary mandate of community and mental health services: people taking control of their own lives in meaningful and sustainable ways. The new paradigm should focus on trusting and workable relationships. It should empower people to take a lead in their own care process. It should work in collaborative ways on mutually agreed upon goals. It should draw upon the personal resources of motivation and hope. And finally, it should create sustainable change through learning and experiential growth. A strengths approach is a specific method of working with and resolving problems experienced by the individual. It does not attempt to ignore the problems and difficulties. Rather, it attempts to identify the positive basis of the person's resources or what may need to be added, and strengths that will lay the basis to address the challenges resulting from the problems. If the strengths-based approach is to be something that truly guides and influences our practice, it should be evident in the language of interactions with the people we serve, the language of service, team, and organizational interactions, and the written documentation of service activities, assessment, service delivery, training, and so forth. It lends itself to the following. First, it seeks to understand the critical variables that contribute to individual resilience and well-functioning individuals, families, and communities. Second, it provides a common language and a preventative philosophy. Third, it sees resilience as a goal that provides a conceptual map to guide prevention and evaluation efforts. Fourth, the intervention strategies are client-driven and relationship-focused. Fifth, it engages distressed individuals with respect and compassion. Sixth, it perceives capacity building as a dynamic process that evolves over an individual's lifetime. And finally, it affirms the healing potential in people and seeks to enhance their strengths as opposed to their deficits. The strengths-based approach needs to be embraced as a philosophy for working with people. The starting point is what's right with people, and external resources are added when required in ways that help change occur in ways that complement people's strengths and goals. The mindset of a resilient person is the following. First, the person feels special and appreciated, with a strong sense of hope and optimism. Second, the person views life as a dynamic journey that involves them writing the next chapters by how they perceive themselves and who they invite on the trip. Third, the individuals have learned to set realistic goals and expectations for themselves. Fourth, the person relies on productive coping strategies that are growth-fostering rather than self-defeating. Fifth, the individual views obstacles as challenges to confront, not to avoid. Sixth, individuals are aware of their weaknesses and vulnerabilities, but purposefully build on their strengths. Seventh, individuals have strong self-esteem and a sense of competence. 8. Individuals have effective interpersonal skills and can seek out assistance and nurturance from others in formal and in informal relationships. 9th, the person knows what they can and cannot control in their lives. And finally, 10th, there is a strong understanding of the need to give back, to support others in their journey. The strengths approach as a philosophy of practice draws one away from an emphasis on procedures, techniques, and knowledge as the keys to change. It reminds us that every person, family, group, and community holds the key to their own transformation and meaningful change process. The real challenge is, and always has been, whether we are willing to fully embrace this way of approaching or working with people. If we do, then the change starts with us, not with those we serve. This ends our training on strength-based assessment. There are a couple of resources that are attached to this lesson that I encourage you to download and print for yourself. First, there is a list of strength-based questions that you may be able to use. Second, there's a very nice article about strength-based assessment. Third, there's a copy of the case management regulations in case you need something to help you to go to sleep. And finally, there is a copy of the PowerPoint slides for this lesson. When you are comfortable with all of the handouts and the material presented in this training, you are required to complete a quiz that is attached to this lesson with a passing score of at least 70% in order to successfully complete this training.